I don't know about you guys, but I can't stand it when I'm working on an edit inside of Photoshop and I just reach a creative roadblock. Everything's going well with your processing and then all of a sudden, you don't know what to do next. You're just out of ideas. Back in the old days, I might take a break from the monitor, have a little walk, come back and then see it with fresh eyes and be reinvigorated with some new creative ideas. But recently I found a better way of getting past this creative block. And that's what I want to share with you in this video. Currently in front of me, I have an edit of a photo I took at Rainbow Falls in the North Island of New Zealand. I'm quite pleased with how it's looking at the moment, but I want to take things in a more artistic direction. I just don't know what that is. So now, rather than just tinkering away aimlessly with different tools and techniques that I know inside of Photoshop and just basically wasting time, now I just load the plugin Luminar AI, and there with the creative tools and everything slider based, I can quickly see new creative possibilities and directions for the photo. Let me show you. Now this is actually a composite of 3 images, all shot from a tripod within the space of about a minute of each other. One was in full sun, one was when the shade came across, and one was taken with a polarizing filter so that I could get these nice long strands of the waterfall. But if I show you the original image, you'll see a problem I had, and that was that literally as I just set my tripod up, I leveled it off, I was ready to take my shots. All of these people basically ploughed down out of nowhere, dived into the water and just started frolicking right in front of me. And not only that, but in the background, I also had some people that suddenly appeared and decided to go exploring behind the waterfall as well. I was there taking these photographs when I was with my family and I'd already used up my sort of half an hour of their patience before they just wanted to head off. And so I needed to just smash these photos out. I couldn't really wait any longer. And so into Photoshop I came, I started working on my retouching. And so what I decided to do was take the best bits of each photograph. And so while I like the vibe of the sunny shot, unfortunately the shadows were starting to get a little bit dark on me, so I reintroduced the version I shot when it was cloudy. And the masking that's allowed me to do this nice and precisely I did with this panel here, and I'll put a link to this panel in the description below. But it's really great if you want to actually just select your highlights, for instance, you've got access to do that. So if you're into luminosity blending like I am, this is such an amazing tool. It's some of the best money I spent in Photoshop. So that's my combination layer where I brought back shadows, and I've also introduced a longer exposure for the waterfall, and then I just did a quick retouch where I got rid of the people and any other objects that were just kind of distracting my eye. So here's our before, here's our after. And in terms of a quite natural and authentic edit, this is pretty good. You might be happy with this. But for me personally, I always like to take things a little bit further. Inside of Photoshop, we have so many options for creative directions and different tools and techniques that we can apply, almost to the point that I'm so spoilt for choice as to what to do, I don't know what to do. So that's where this next plugin comes in, because it really helps to just free up your creative thinking, get those creative juices flowing again, and quickly give you some new options. So let's load it up. I'm going to come to Filter, Skylum Software, and select Luminar AI. And Luminar is going to start loading in the layer that we have active inside of Photoshop. So as you can see on the right hand side, that was my retouch layer. And this is where things get really fun, because we can use any of Luminar's templates just as a Kickstarter, just to kind of give us an idea of something we could do. If you've seen any of my other videos on Luminar AI, you'll know that I'm not a massive fan of the templates that actually ship with Luminar, but I am a huge fan of the tools that exist inside Luminar. But what I find the templates are really good for is just really quickly giving you a bit of a creative nudge. So for example, if we look at our before and our after of this one, we can make a decision. Do we want to have a more saturated version of what we were working with? Just with one click, we can also say, do we want to be working in black and white? Do I want a fairly punchy yet desaturated look? Using templates is an option, but it's a very low level option in my opinion. We can go so much deeper with Luminar. So what I'm going to do is come to our history panel here, just go back to my original, and now we can quickly go through some of these tools and just grab the sliders and actually see what effect those sliders are having. The really great thing is we're not confined to an all or nothing approach with the sliders. We also have the option to mask in the look that it's creating just where we want it. So this is a really nice, quick and efficient way to work. So let's toggle this off, toggle it on, and the accent AI is certainly helping to bring a lot of impact to the image, but I don't want it everywhere. I'm going to use my paintbrush tool, and I'm literally just going to paint this in over the waterfall because I certainly want our attention going to that. And I'm going to paint it over the water as well, just to brighten the water up. So here's our before, here's our after. We can go to the Structure AI tool, and if I grab this and start cranking it up, you'll see that it starts to really enhance the local contrast. As with most of these tools, it's pretty powerful, so you never want to really be using this at 100%, or I certainly haven't found a reason to use it with that level of intensity as yet. But again, using the mask tool, what we can do is paint it in, and we can paint it in with a lower opacity. So I may want to just put a little bit of it over the waterfall. I may want to also put a little bit over the rocks here just to help introduce a little bit of interest down there. And I certainly like what it was doing with the tree trunk itself. I really like the texture of the bark on the tree trunk, so I'm just going to go over this one more time just to help bring that out a little bit more. If we work our way down the tools top to bottom, which is normally a very useful way to work, we come next to colour. But I like to work with all my colour adjustments right at the end, so I'm going to leave that because there's another really powerful colour tool, and I just love applying that right at the end of my workflow. Let's jump into the landscape section and just see if there's anything we can do here. So within the landscape section, we've got a few tools, one being this dehaze slider, which as I move that from the left to the right, you can see it's sort of giving everything a more rich look. It's certainly saturating the colours, and I'm not sure that that's particularly useful for this look. We have a foliage enhancer, which is going to just talk into the greens and boost those up, but I don't really want to go there. The only thing I think I'm going to do here is just add a little bit of that colour enhancement into the water in front of the waterfall. So again, I'm just going to grab my paintbrush and just paint that in really roughly under there. It's not going to do too much. And as I move towards the vignette tool, it's got me thinking about my composition and the way that things are framed. So absolutely the key player in this photograph is this beautiful waterfall that we've got going on here. I love the fact that we've got a bit of a sense of framing from the foreground here, which albeit it is slightly out of focus, but I'm not too worried about that. But then this nice, really interesting tree going up on the right hand side, and then the branch that comes over the top. So we've almost got a back to front sea just encapsulating the waterfall itself. But on the left hand side, we don't have anything to hold the viewer's eye in. So it's almost like the left hand side of the frame, your eye can just sort of fall out of the frame on that side. You could argue that it's a legitimate choice because the water here is unobstructed, and so you can lead into the frame from this side. But personally, I really don't want this area to compete with our waterfall, particularly not in terms of brightness or texture, which is what it currently is doing. So I'm going to grab the vignette tool and I'm going to grab the amount and push it all the way to the left, just so that I can better see exactly what that vignette tool is doing. I may want to just bring it in ever so slightly. And I'll drop down the advanced settings. Now we can play with the roundness setting here, and an important slider that we can't overlook is the feathering, because I find that as long as we avoid going to the left where we make a really hard edge, the further we push things towards the right, the softer that transition is going to be and the more believable our vignette is going to be. And yes, I know that right now it does not look good. That is because we're at -100, we're at the full extent. But like I say, I just like to put it that far down so I can actually see where it's affecting. Now, one lovely thing about the vignette tool inside of Luminar, we're not constrained to having the vignette radiate from the center point out. Basically, we can redefine where the center of the vignette is. So for example, if I was to click up in the top corner here, we're saying this is going to be the brightest part of the image. Over here is going to be the brightest part. And so that gives us a lot more control. So in this instance, I may want to click directly on the waterfall and say, this is the most important part of the image, so fade out from there. And I think that is exactly what I'm going to do. Might make just a couple of tweaks, maybe push the size just back a little bit. And now I can ease that amount slider back. You can see when I put this back to 0, it almost looks too bright uniformly across the whole frame. And our eye doesn't lead into that waterfall. But as soon as we start bringing this vignette back in, it just really helps to hold our eye on our key feature, the waterfall. Now, if like me, you're Photoshop through and through, you might be thinking, I can do all of this in Photoshop. Why do I need Luminar AI? Well, before I move on to the creative tools, it's just worth underlining just how easy it is to do all these things. Yes, you can do most of this stuff, say with curves, darkening it down, putting a mask on and everything, but you would have already needed to make those decisions. I like being able to just go through these sliders, have a little play with them and see, does this look good? Does it not? Is this a direction I want to go in? Is it not? And as I close that down, we can have a look at our before and our after. And although we haven't made a massive change to it yet, already I just feel like we've got a slightly more artistic interpretation of the scene. Okay, let's move on to some more of these tools. These ones in the creative section are a lot of fun. We've got Sky AI, which allows us just to switch skies out, but at the moment I'm happy with how things are. We can add objects to our sky as well. Atmosphere AI, this is for adding fog into the scene. And it uses some very clever technology where it actually creates a three-dimensional distance map based on our two-dimensional photo. Very clever. Layered fog is an option that I quite like because that's some low-lying fog. And again, just like with some of the other tools, I like to crank the amount all the way to 100. And what we can do, watch the depth here. As I increase the depth, the fog comes forward, and as you take the depth down, it recedes back into the distance. So this is a very, very clever and powerful tool. It also knows where elements are in the photo to mask those out appropriately. We have an option to darken down the fog as well. But just like with all of the tools, we have the option just to grab the mask and we can just paint this in where we want it. So I'm thinking that we enhance the fact that there's going to be a lot of spray coming off from this waterfall, which there was, and you can see that in the photo, and we can just click and now we see our original again. And now where I'm painting and we see the red mask, this is where I'm going to be painting that fog in that we just layered in before. And I'm just going to really roughly paint that. And now let's toggle off and toggle on. And if we feel it's just a little bit too much, we can again control that amount slider and say, yeah, I want some of it, but maybe not 100%, maybe around that 66 mark. Yep, cool. Now the next tool, I don't think it's going to be appropriate for this particular photo, but it's a really cool tool anyway. Let me crank the amount slider up. These are intelligent sun rays, and I have spent a lot of time before in Photoshop. I've even got a tutorial on this channel how to create sun rays in Photoshop, and yet you can absolutely do it and you can control it. But it's time consuming. I think the video I put together was about 20 minutes demonstrating how you can make sun rays in Photoshop. But in Luminar AI, it's just so much easier. Again, because everything is slider based, you've got the control to do what you want with this particular filter. Just like the other tools, we've got the option to mask things in. What we can do is ignore the fact that this area here where it's coming over the top of the tree, it just doesn't look good. I'm not going to worry about that. If I wanted to, what I can do is just come in with my mask, use my right bracket key just to make the paintbrush just a little bigger. And then I'm just going to paint in the center portion of the scene. And now we can just get the effect of those sun rays just bleeding in where we want them. If you guys are liking the look of Luminar AI and think it'd be a useful plugin for your Photoshop, Lightroom, or even using it as a standalone editor, I do have a discount code which is @Sky10, and you can use that in the link below, and you can get yourself a copy if you haven't got it already. While we've got specific glow tools in here, things like the Autumn effect, which are normally really good for landscapes, yes, you can create an Autumn effect inside of Photoshop using a couple of layers and changing the blending mode. But if you're not sure whether or not the Autumn effect is a look that you're after, why would you spend a couple of minutes setting the Autumn effect up only to go, do you know what, that's not really what I'm after, and throwing those adjustment layers away in Photoshop, when you can come into a tool like this, just grab the slider, crank it up and go, do I like it? Do I not like it? Yeah, maybe not, but you've got that option. But one of the tools that I really like that gives a kind of glow, but does it in a way that I actually prefer, and that's the mystical filter. So if I crank this all the way to 100, you can see exactly what it's doing. To me, the effect is similar to duplicating a layer in Photoshop, changing the blend mode to soft light, and then blurring it, say with a Gaussian blur. But the fact that you can just grab a slider and just play with that inside of here, it's so much quicker, so much more intuitive. I really love it. Let's toggle it off and toggle it on. And if you want to keep track of where you've come from and where you've headed to, you can just use that eyeball tool, which shows us this is our before And this is where we're at the moment. This location is just really special and already has a magical and mystical kind of feel to it. So with my editing, I just wanted to enhance that feeling, that emotion. And I wasn't quite sure of what tools I wanted to use inside of Photoshop to achieve that. But inside of Luminar, I've quickly been able to say, okay, I'm heading in the right direction now. Right, I'm going to bring the amount of the mystical slider down just a little bit, maybe even just reduce the autumn effect too before I jump into super contrast. This may not do too much for us because the photo that I was bringing in was already quite nicely exposed. We didn't have too many problem areas, but if you're wanting to do things like control your highlights, we've got the option to do that, and I quite like that. It's it's not too bad. We can grab the midtones, and we can grab the shadows and just give them a little subtle boost as well if we want to. Let's toggle that off and then toggle it on. Okay, time for my favorite bit. This is what ties everything together, and that is working with our colors. For me, one of my favorite tools inside of Luminar AI, and this is worth the price of admission alone, and that is the mood tool. With inside the mood tool, we have got the opportunity to add a lookup table to our photo. And Luminar ships with some really nice LUTs already. So sometimes it's just a case of going through and picking a LUT that you feel works with your photo. You have nice muted desaturated looks like this 1960s one. You have the ability to shift the colors around. There's a lot we can achieve with these, but I'm going to go with this involve. We can increase the amount, decrease it. We can change the contrast if we want to. Like I say, it's just really intuitive to get these results. And that's just one color tool. We can use that in conjunction with other things. So we can come in, we can play with the vibrancy, reduce the saturation if we want to. We could come into individual colors. So I could jump into the saturation. And if I felt that the greens were still oversaturated, I could drop the greens down slightly, maybe even the cyans, but we could boost the blues up. We can change the actual hue. So we really have got a lot of options. Beyond that, we could even come down and jump into the toning section. And here we're able to color the highlights and the shadows. So we might decide that we want to introduce a complementary color scheme where we're putting some yellows and oranges in the highlights and perhaps introducing some bluey purples into the shadows. We can play with how much of that or how little we want. I do feel that because I've been chatting away to you guys and demonstrating the tools, I probably haven't given the actual image itself the same kind of level of care and attention that I would normally. So let's look at our before and our after. Now, I'm not sure that I actually like the edit that I've done on this at the moment, and I think I'll probably revisit and just tweak things just a little bit, maybe recolor it as well. But I just wanted to give you guys a demonstration of what this plugin is capable of. So when you're happy with your edit, you just click apply up here, and that will export your photo with all of these changes, and it will then spit that back out as a new layer inside of Photoshop. If previously you've only been using Luminar as a standalone program and using it as an editor that way, which is fine, but you want to install it as a plugin for Photoshop and Lightroom as well, what you want to do is come up to the top left, and from here we're going to go to the File section and come down to your option Install Plugins. Now we have the option to install the plugin for Photoshop and Lightroom. So you just need to click those and click done. And now when you open up Lightroom or Photoshop, Luminar AI will be there as an available plugin. While I thought this edit was okay, I wasn't really in love with it. So I went back into Luminar and I worked up another edit, and that is this. It's slightly more refined, it's not as over the top, and I actually prefer this version. So if I show our original and the Luminar version, you can tell that it has changed a fair bit. I may not want to use it in 100% opacity, so I may just sort of ease it back around that sort of 70% mark. So I've still got a bit of the original, a bit of the Luminar edit. And now with that creative push, I was able to better sort of get a feel for my photo, the direction I wanted to take it, and then just made my final decisions, such as I just wanted to dark down the edges. So I just added another vignette, but one that was done by actually dropping down the highlights. And then as a finishing touch, I just introduced a soft light layer of a uniform color, a blue wash, and I've just applied that with 24%. So to take us from this initial capture through to my final, more artistic interpretation here, I would say that the absolute key player in this process was having Luminar AI to help me with my creative direction. If you want to get yourself a copy of Luminar, I've got a discount code which is @Sky10. You're welcome to use that and save yourself a bit of money at the checkout. Also, by following the link in the description, you can get yourself a free trial of Luminar, and I'd recommend that if you're using a slightly older machine. Because it's AI driven, it's quite resource intensive, so you just want to make sure that your processor and your memory can handle it and run it well. Guys, that's it for this video. I hope you like the process. I've taken this image here, and with a bit of masking help from Luminar, also linked in the description, where we've increased the shadows, I've then done a retouch to get rid of all the people and any miscellaneous branches and other distracting elements I don't like. I then had a play around with Luminar and quickly came up with a much more creative interpretation. I didn't really like that one, so I just quickly played around again and had a more refined version, and this version I do like. And from there, once I was happy with that creative direction, I was able just to apply my very finishing touches. So we've gone from a nicely framed snap to a more refined art piece that you may see printed on a canvas put up on someone's wall. Guys, I really hope you've liked this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment in the description, and consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to learn more about photo editing. Thanks very much, guys. Catch you in the next video.